Good afternoon. I'm Bill Griswold, director of the Cleveland Museum of Art, and it is my privilege to welcome you to the museum and to today's program. The Dr. Ranajit K. Datta Distinguished Lecture in Indian Art is one of a series of scholarly lectures highlighting different parts of the museum's collection that each year bring to Cleveland specialists in a wide range of fields to present their research and to introduce our audiences to new perspectives on the history of art. I hope you'll join us again on Saturday, May the 10th, for the Pauline and Joseph Degenfelder Distinguished Lecture on Chinese Art, when Jenny Zhou will discuss jade, China's enduring obsession. Today, I would like to begin by expressing our immense gratitude for the endowment that Dr. Ranajit K. Datta established in memory of his parents, Kiran P. and S.C. Datta. A chemist at General Electric, Dr. Ranajit Datta volunteered as a docent here at the museum for some 26 years, and during that period, he offered tours of the Indian and Southeast Asian art galleries, forging a close relationship with our curators, Stan Schuma, and more recently, Sonia Rhee Mace. He also forged a close connection with their colleague, Marjorie Williams. His commitment to education and to the collection prompted Dr. Datta to make the munificent gift that in turn makes possible this important series of lectures. And we will forever be deeply grateful to Dr. Datta, as well as to the Datta family. And Ashim, I'm so glad you could be here with us today. The Datta Distinguished Lecture in Indian Art has in the past addressed such topics as Buddhist art, conservation, medieval palm leaf manuscripts, and most recently, paintings from Udaipur, highlighting works in the mesmerizing 2023 exhibition called A Splendid Land. This year, we'll hear from Professor Emeritus Daniel Ehnbom, who will shed new light on court painting in India, and in particular, on the focused exhibition currently on view in Gallery 242A, which he co-curated with our curator, Sonia Rhee Mace. The museum's holdings of Indian paintings have expanded dramatically over the past 10 to 15 years, with the acquisition in 2013 of 91 Mughal and Deccan paintings from the collection of Catherine Glynn Bankheim and Ralph Bankheim, and 5 years later, the acquisition of 125 superb Rajasthani and Pahari paintings from the same important collection. These transformative acquisitions have made the CMA a burgeoning center for the study of Indian court painting from the 15th to the 19th centuries. And they've made possible the twice-yearly rotations that continue to enrich the museum's presentation of Indian art, illuminating significant themes in the history of a fascinating and immensely appealing art form. This afternoon, we are thrilled to welcome Daniel Ehnbom, who will speak with us about a number of works in the CMA's collection, putting them into the context of the dramatic changes that took place in northern India during the 1500s. A little housekeeping. Please take a moment to silence your cell phone to prevent distractions during today's talk, and please leave the back 2 rows on the ground floor of the auditorium open for visitors with mobility challenges. And now, it is my pleasure to give the podium to the museum's George P. Bickford Curator of Indian and Southeast Asian Art, Sonia Rhee Mace. Widely recognized for her scholarship in the field of Indian art, Sonia has played a critical role in building the CMA's collection of Indian paintings, and she will introduce today's speaker. Thank you all. Sonia.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful April afternoon. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Cameron, Aaron, and Mary, and our whole AV team for organizing and presenting this event today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Daniel J. Ehnbom, Associate Professor Emeritus of Art History at the University of Virginia, Charlottesville, from where he has come to spend the weekend with us in Cleveland. Of Swedish descent and raised in northern Wisconsin near the shores of Lake Superior, his expertise in the arts of Southern Asia might seem surprising. He does, however, have a deep family connection with the region. His paternal grandfather's half-uncle was the captain of a mercantile ship, the records of which show that he was eaten by a shark off the coast of India in 1834. They don't mention how or why, so that must be left to the imagination. But Dan's spirit seems to have an ancestral connection to the region. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where he majored in Indian studies, he elected to pursue his PhD in the art of India at the University of Chicago with the late Professor Pramod Chandra. Pramod Chandra had been a friend and advisor to Sherman Lee, the director of the Cleveland Museum of Art from 1958 to 1983. Together, they secured, among many important acquisitions, an extraordinary early Mughal manuscript, the Tuti-nama of the Cleveland Museum of Art, or The Tales of a Parrot, which consists of 662 pages, so 331 folios, and is illustrated with 215 paintings. Chandra was the first to recognize that this manuscript contained paintings by artists drawn from several Indian milieus, some of whom were mentioned by name in marginal inscriptions, working under the direction of court painters from Iran for the young Mughal Emperor Akbar. More than any other single work, the Tuti-nama of the Cleveland Museum of Art shows the processes leading to the formulation of a new artistic genre that we now celebrate under the moniker of Imperial Mughal painting. Dan Ehnbom co-authored with Pramod Chandra the first publication of the Tuti-nama that introduced the importance of the manuscript to the world in conjunction with an exhibition of the paintings that opened at the CMA in 1976 and subsequently traveled to the Smart Museum in Chicago. Dan was awarded his PhD with honors in 1984 with a thesis that continues to be a kind of Bible for those of us in the field of Indian painting. His in-depth analysis of a dispersed Hindu manuscript dating to the second quarter of the 16th century, 4 pages of which are on view upstairs, explained how artists in India were experimenting with new modes of visual and experiential visualities in their unprecedented depictions of the life story of Krishna. Another Cleveland connection took place in 1985 during the Festival of India. Incidentally, Datta, our late sponsor for this lecture series, took a leading role in organizing the Festival of India activities in Cleveland. And Stan Chuma, the George P. Bickford Curator of Indian and Southeast Asian Art from 1973 to 2003, organized one of the Festival of India's landmark exhibitions on Kushan sculpture at CMA. Simultaneously, Pramod Chandra organized a remarkable exhibition of sculptural masterworks from India at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and Dan was the exhibition coordinator. Since then, Dan served as assistant professor of Asian art at the State University of New York College at New Paltz, the South Asia area consulting editor for the Dictionary of Art, and guest curator at the American Federation of Arts in New York, before beginning his tenure at UVA in 1992, where he twice led and taught, in spite of his great-uncle's dramatic fate, the semester at sea. Here we see him guest lecturing for a Case Western Reserve University art history class held at CMA in 2014, and Pramod Chandra is in the background. His publications are sources consulted regularly by students and scholars in the field and include Indian miniatures from the Ehrenfeld collection, Realms of Earth and Sky, Indian painting from the 15th to 19th century with Crystal Gulbranson, and major studies on the masters of the dispersed Bhagavata Purana, the Hamsanama, and Gita Govinda. Throughout his long and illustrious career, Dan has regularly been involved with museums. At the Fralin Museum at UVA, he was responsible for substantially expanding the South Asian collections. His most recent of many guest curatorships can be enjoyed here at the Cleveland Museum of Art in the second floor gallery of Indian paintings, which celebrates his position as a leading scholar and felicitates his retirement in 2020. I had the distinct pleasure of working with Dan to select the paintings, work on the layout, and decide on the conversations we wanted the paintings to have with one another. Thanks to the Tuti-nama and the acquisition of the Bentheim collection, the Cleveland Museum of Art is uniquely positioned to tell the story of the 16th century in Indian painting. I now turn the podium over to my dear friend and colleague, with whom I share the privilege of having studied with the same teacher. Professor Daniel J. Ehnbom will now share his insights about painting in India in the 1500s, continuation and innovation. Thank you. Please welcome Dan.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Bill. I feel very much at home here at the Cleveland Museum. If I may be permitted a moment of reminiscence, I have been coming to this museum since 1976, and I have seen it grow, and I continue to be impressed with the Cleveland Museum of Art and with the distinguished curators and the distinguished director of the museum. I came here in the Sherman Lee days. He was a great director, as you know. I worked at the Smart Gallery in those days, now the Smart Museum at the University of Chicago, and my boss there was Catherine Lee. So I was deeply, deeply indebted to the Lee family over the years. I am honored to be here to give the Ranajit K. Datta Distinguished Lecture in Indian Art. Colleagues of mine have preceded me on this podium, colleagues of mine who maybe did a better job than I will do. I have to say I haven't given a public lecture in 5 years, except one on Zoom, and that hardly counts. But I'll do my best. And one of the things that Sonia alluded to was the depth of the collection here, and part of that is through the generosity of my very old friend, Catherine Glynn Bentheim. The collection that she and her late husband put together, much of it is now here, and it has greatly enriched already rich holdings in Indian painting. And as a result, I'm going to use almost everything in my talk will be from the Cleveland collection. And those things that are not from the Cleveland collection were in the exhibition in 1976. So they were here for a while, even if they're not part of the collection entirely. Just to, if you'll, and I want to thank not only all of you for coming, but friends of mine have come, and I'm very grateful to them. It's a great honor for me to have my friends come and listen to me once again. I hope no one is disappointed. If I may be permitted again, a little bit of personal reminiscence. This is the cover of the catalog of the show that opened here, and then was at the then Smart Gallery at the University of Chicago. It was my first scholarly publication with Pramod Chandra, and as Sonia told you, I studied with Pramod at the University of Chicago, and Sonia studied with Pramod at Harvard. So as I like to say, same father, different mothers. And by the way, I've known Sonia I met Sonia's mother when she was pregnant with Sonia. So I've known Sonia since before she was born. And we have become very good friends. As Sonia said, the sort of point of this rotation upstairs, which I hope you'll have seen or will see, is the importance of the Cleveland Tuti-nama, which is an extraordinary manuscript. And the history of the manuscript is itself very interesting. It was in an estate sale in Laurel, Maryland in 1960, where it was sold as 18th century provincial Persian in a French 19th century Rivière binding, very important binding. And it was bought by a dealer in, of all places, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm from Wisconsin, so I can make cracks about Milwaukee. And the dealer who bought it began to take it apart, which is unfortunately something that happens all too often to manuscripts. Sherman Lee recognized what it was very clever, told the dealer that the Cleveland Museum was interested in the text, so he wanted him to get as many pages of it back as he could. I think they were being sold for $15 a page at the time. And the dealer did get much of it back, and most of it is now here. There are some stray leaves elsewhere. There's one in the National Museum of Asian Art. There are a couple in San Diego. There's one in an Indian collection, the Goenka collection. And there are some missing ones, so keep your eyes open, especially if you go to Milwaukee. And another important point of this talk, and another important point of what happened and what I'm going to talk about, is the reign of the Emperor Akbar, whom you see here early in his reign in a page that, here he is, obviously, a page from a history of the reign of Akbar called the Akbarnama, of which there is more than one version, but this is from the earliest of the versions. And scholars disagree on the date. Some new evidence has suggested that the date of this is about 1586 or 1587. Generally, it's been dated to about 1590 to 95, but those dates are pretty close together, so we won't worry too much about it. But this shows Akbar shortly after he came to the throne. He came to the throne as a teenager. He was born in 1542 when his father was in exile, and his father died in 1556. Which is also important in understanding. Let's just go back a little bit. Akbar's grandfather founded the Mughal dynasty in 1526. His name was Babur. He was a sort of unemployed Central Asian prince looking for a place to rule, and he joined forces with many Indian rulers who were not happy with the current political state of India at the time, excuse me, and he conquered India in 1526, established the Mughal Empire, but he died shortly thereafter. In 1530, his son and heir Humayun fell ill, and Babur prayed to God to spare Humayun and take him instead, and God obliged. Humayun lived, Babur died. Humayun became then the second emperor. Humayun was a complicated man. His reputation has gone up and down over the years. It's recently been somewhat rehabilitated by my colleague from Vienna, Ebba Koch, in a very important book on Humayun's reign. But Humayun was driven into exile in 1530, and it looked like the Mughal Empire might have been just a mayfly empire that really didn't last. He went into exile in Iran, and this became extremely important, not just for his political fortunes and for his taking the empire back, but also for the history of art. Because when Humayun was in exile in Iran, Shah Tahmasp, the ruler, the Safavid ruler of Iran, who had assembled what was probably the greatest workshop of painters in the Islamic world, had an attack of orthodoxy and broke up his painting workshop, leaving some of the most highly trained painters, miniature painters in the world, unemployed. And some of them, as Humayun put together a force to reconquer India, some of them elected to go to India with Humayun. Some of the most important of the artists of the time, Mir Musawwir, who's represented in the rotation upstairs, his son, Mir Syed Ali, and the painter Khwaja Abdus Samad, who were generally regarded as some of the best painters of the Persian workshop. So that they threw their lot in with Humayun. Humayun was able to reconquer North India in 1555. But the bad luck that plagued the Mughal Empire at its beginning continued. Humayun, as it says in the records, hastening to answer the call to prayer from his library, where it's generally thought he'd been drinking, by the way. The Mughals did have an issue with substance abuse. He slipped on the stairs, fell, fractured his skull, lingered for a few days, and died. Having retaken Delhi in 1555, he dies in 1556. His son and heir, Akbar, having been born in 1542, is still pretty young. But luckily, he has a very, very capable mother who was also a patron of painting. And he had a very capable nobleman, Bayram Khan, who had been in the court of his father. And this is from the Art Institute of Chicago by the great painter Basavan and another painter, Shankar. More than one painter often worked on these miniatures. And Basavan is responsible, certainly, for the central section, as well as for the general composition. Shankar did some of the painting around it. But we're told in the text that this is Bayram Khan, the prime minister, the brilliant prime minister, who worked closely with Akbar's mother, Hamida Begum. This is Bayram Khan providing his first service to His Majesty, the Emperor Akbar, the work of chaining up the drunken madman. And the drunken madman was a man named Shah Abul Mali, who had been a great favorite of Humayun. So Akbar cut him a lot of slack. He finally got impatient with him and had him executed, but that was later. Here he's just being taken away so that his drunken presence in the court would not continue to insult the new emperor. Now Akbar, he was a remarkable man. He was illiterate. He could neither read nor write. The court historian said that God gave him a special understanding, so he didn't need to know how to read and write. More prosaically, it's described that when he was growing up and his tutors would come to give him lessons, he would be out flying a kite or fishing or something, and he didn't really cotton to reading and writing. We'd probably say today that he was dyslexic. And I have seen, he was able to write his name, but the writing is like the writing of a child. I've seen his name written in the flyleaf of a manuscript that belonged to his father and stayed in the Mughal court, now in the Khudabakhsh Library in Patna. And it's the writing of a child. It's a laborious Akbar. But he was the emperor of India. If he wanted something read, he could have it read to him, and indeed, that's what he did. And he was extremely interested in literature, and he was extremely interested in painting. He had, by the time of Humayun's death, Mir Musawwir had died, even though he'd come back with Humayun, but Mir Syed Ali and Khwaja Abdus Samad, two of the greatest of the Safavid painters, were there in the court, and Akbar created a workshop with artists drawn from all over India, where, as the court historian Abul Fazl says, under the transmuting glance of the emperor, a new style was born, a style unlike any of its parent styles, even though we can see the sources, and that's a little bit about what I'll talk about today. I'm a big fan of Akbar, if you haven't realized that already. I think he was one of the most extraordinary rulers at an extraordinary time, not just in India, but I think he's a world-class extraordinary ruler. And here you see the empire when Akbar died. He consolidated the empire, he expanded the empire, and the Mughal Empire would be larger later in the 17th century, but you could argue it was never richer and never perhaps more powerful than it was when Emperor Akbar died in 1605. So he had a good long reign. He thought it would be much longer. He thought he'd live to be 120 years old. Didn't work out, but he thought that. I guess he'd somehow gotten that impression from somebody predicting the future, but and it's a pity, in fact, that he didn't live to be 120. I think the history of 17th century India might have gone more smoothly, but at any rate, Akbar dies in 1605. And of course, when he became emperor, Delhi had been recently taken, Agra. There was a very sort of small geographical area, but he expanded. A man also of great personal bravery, a man of tremendous ambition. He left an empire much larger and much better established than the empire he inherited when Humayun died in 1556. Now, I'm an object person. I like looking at objects. I gave you a little historical background because I think it's important, but what I really want to do is look at paintings with you. And if you haven't looked at them upstairs, I highly recommend that you go and look at them. Photographs give us tremendous opportunities for studying paintings, but nothing really replaces that experience of being one-on-one with the object. Unfortunately, you won't be one-on-one with these objects. They're both in the Beena collection, where not only were they on display in Cleveland in the '76 show, but of course, your distinguished curator, Sonia Ree Mace, was at the San Diego Museum of Art as the Beena curator before she came here to grace you with her presence and with her remarkable, far-reaching scholarship. These are pictures that are, in a way, kind of bookends. The one on the left is from the series of paintings on which I did my dissertation many years ago. And the one on the right is from a manuscript made for Akbar about 1590, a manuscript called the Harivansh, which is the genealogy of Vishnu, Vishnu being one of the great gods of Hinduism, and one of his most important manifestations was the god Krishna. On the left, the painting is from a group of paintings illustrating the Bhagavata Purana, the sort of standard Sanskrit account of the life of Krishna. And at this time, there was a tremendous revival of Krishna worship going on in North India. Now, you look at these pictures. The one on the left, 1520 to 1530, we're not sure exactly of the date. The one on the right, about 1590. The one on the left represents what the dominant style of North Indian painting looked like when Akbar came to the throne in 1556. And as you can see, it's flat, it's abstract, It emphasizes the juxtaposition of blocks of bright color. It's timeless in a way. Krishna, shown here, killing a demon, the demon Naraka, who, among other things, had stolen the earrings of the mother of the king of the gods, and had very many wives. He's attacking Naraka, whom you see here, our demon king. And here he is with his consort Satyabhama on his man-bird vehicle, Garuda, who has the body of a man and the head of a bird. And he's in a kind of permanent state of arrival. And you think, gosh, these are so different. What relationship do they have to each other than they're the same subject? Here is Krishna, again, attacking Naraka. He uses his discus to split Naraka down the middle. And I can tell you from experience, from having taken grade school classes through an exhibition with this picture, this is a picture greatly admired by fourth grade boys. And by me. I guess I'm, at heart, still a fourth grader. But when you look at these two pictures for a moment, and the Mughal picture has a very different palette, a palette that's with softer colors. Here, this is a very bold line. Here's a very refined line. All of these differences are very important and very real. But if you pause for a moment and look at the compositions, this is almost a kind of reversal of this composition, turned into a far more three-dimensional representation. You see that vigorous diagonal, a characteristic, by the way, of the style that you see on the left, of the relationship between Krishna and his consort and the demon, is preserved in the Mughal picture. The figure types, the sort of square-headed woman, is echoed in the female figure here. And even the general composition, this sort of circular citadel of Naraka, if you look here, you get a kind of echo of that. So there are compositional elements from this very different style that are preserved in Mughal painting. And I could, if I had more time, I could show you many examples of that, of compositional elements from pre-Akbar period painting, not exactly pre-Mughal, because the Mughal dynasty probably was already in existence when this was made, but certainly pre-Akbar period. There are important links, and we'll expand on that a little in the course of the talk. Now, earlier than the picture that you just looked at on the left is an example, which is in the rotation upstairs, of a manuscript made in 1513 that came to Cleveland through the generous intervention of Catherine Glynn Bentheim, who's in the audience. Hi, Kathy, thank you for coming. Which is in a style that we generally call the Western Indian style. It was practiced in more than Western India, but it was developed in Western India. And following a 16th century Tibetan historian who talked about Indian painting in terms of the school of the ancient East and the school of the ancient West, Western Indian painting has become kind of standard. This is was made in Marwar, in what is now Rajasthan, in 1513. And it's from a manuscript that, it's quite a mouthful. Let's see if I can get through it. The Jambu Dvipa Prajnapti Sutra. And it gives you an understanding of what was the dominant style in North India for centuries, a style that was extremely conservative, hieratic, glacial in its stylistic changes. And so in the 16th century, for reasons that are not entirely clear to us, that style began to be supplanted by a style that is not as well understood. This is from that same Bhagavata Purana, but this one is in the Cleveland collection, and this one is upstairs. You'll see it. Pretty much everything I show you from here on in, with the exception of one comparison, is from the Cleveland collection. One of the things that's extraordinary about this institution is one is able to do an exhibition like this, drawing solely from the home collection. No loans were required to tell the story, and the story is a complicated one with lots of different threads and lots of different things happening. And we don't really even have a proper name for this style. We know that it was practiced and was the dominant style in North India in, roughly speaking, the first half of the 16th century. We have some dated examples. For a long time, we only had two. Now we have three. And two of the three are dated. One of them is dated 1516, and the other is dated 1540. We know that this style was practiced in North India. We know that it had a tremendous influence not just on Mughal painting, but on the development of subsequent painting in North India. And again, we see that wonderful boldness and abstraction. We see the use of the juxtaposition of blocks of bright color and black. This is Krishna's foster father meeting with the elders of the village because there have been so many demons showing up because they're after Krishna, and Krishna kills them. But they're thinking, you know, maybe the neighborhood is going to pot. Maybe we should move. And they do. But somehow, the conventions of this style, although this style doesn't die out entirely, but it fades in importance, and this style emerges. We actually call it, just so that I have a name for it, and I'm trying to avoid too much terminology because it kind of gets in the way for some people, but we call it the Chora Panchashika group style, another mouthful, or CPS group style, after the best-known series of paintings in the style, which illustrates a text, probably from the 11th century, of a poet who fell in love with a princess and was going to be executed by an angry father, by an angry king, but he wrote a poem that was so moving, he was spared. So the CPS group style, North India, the Delhi-Agra region for sure, probably more widely distributed. We also know that one was produced up in the Himalayas in the second half of the 16th century. So I've kind of tried to establish a little bit about dominant styles in North India in the period first before the Mughals, then before the reign of Akbar. The great manuscript that came to be known in India, from Mughal India, was a manuscript, both of these are upstairs, called the Hamzanama, which was prepared by the court workshop for Akbar, and unfortunately we don't have an exact date. It was begun, took 15 years to complete. It was made in 14 volumes, survived intact until sometime in the 18th century, but now the 14 volumes of 100 pages each, 1,400 pictures, now we have only about 10%, a little over 10% surviving. So it's a great privilege for us to have examples upstairs in the rotation. The Hamza is the story of the uncle of the prophet. Adventures having to do with the uncle of the prophet, fantastic adventures, but also having to do with the spread of Islam. Now, when the Hamzanama came to be known, and it came to be well known in the West, well, there were good examples of it in Vienna in the end of the 19th century. Those ended up in the Museum für angewandte Kunst in Vienna. But a group of pictures of the Hamza came to Great Britain in the 1920s. And they are now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Those represent the two largest groups of illustrations from the Hamza. It's an enormous manuscript, as you'll see when you look upstairs. Big. Imagine 14 volumes of 100 pages each, all of them this big. And it's very punchy. It represents a style that Kumaraswamy, the great scholar who was at Boston for many years, came obviously from South Asia, from Sri Lanka. His father was a Sri Lankan Tamil. His mother was an Englishwoman who'd been a lady-in-waiting to Queen Victoria, actually. Unusual wedding for the time. Kumaraswamy was born, started out as a geologist, very important figure. And he talked about Mughal painting in its inception as young, bold, and fond of experiment. And I think we certainly see that youthful dynamism and that boldness in pictures like this. On the left, you see a hero killing a demon. And on the, on the left you see, you do see a hero killing an enemy, not a demon as such, under a grand tree. And on the right you see a story where Hamza's, this is by the way from book 11 of the 14, and this is from, if I remember correctly, from book 14, the son of Hamza plugging up a hole in a dam. The water from the reservoir threatened to wash away his father's camp. So he's making sure that his father's camp survives. And you can see the confusion caused down here by the water, which will soon be stopped because he breaks the chain, the plug goes back in, and the flood is ended. On the left, you see a page from a great manuscript from the first half of the 16th century from Iran, the story of the pre-Islamic rulers of Iran called the Shahnameh, written in the 11th century for a king based in Afghanistan, but a Persian speaker, by the great poet Firdausi. And in the 16th century, this national epic of Iran, Shah Tahmasp had illustrated in a sumptuous manuscript, which has itself an interesting history, but I don't think I have the time to go into it. And people said that the Hamzanama was really just a kind of provincial Persian style. But when you actually compare them, first of all, there's a tremendous difference of scale, and you'll see that if you go upstairs. But here's a picture where the hero Rustam is killing a demon. And so it's a pretty violent picture in terms of its subject. But when you look at it, it's aestheticized. It's made into a pretty picture. The violence is de-emphasized in favor of the preciousness of the work, whereas the Hamza, it's all about putting the violence, putting the blood, putting the activity right in your face. There's no reticence here. It's all about blood. It's all about, again, in Kumaraswamy's terms, young, bold, and certainly you see that boldness here. This is a very elegant picture, and one of the collaborators on this picture was Mir Musawwir, who disappears from the scene just about the time Humayun reconquers India. So we lose Mir Musawwir, but he did do some pictures for Humayun. They're in a collection in Western India now. Now, the Tuti-nama is what really gives us the story of how Mughal painting began, because the Tuti-nama shows, as we'll see, the combination of elements, the Persianate, the Indic, as people like to say, the Indian sources, and some even say European sources. But the Tuti-nama is the story, and here you see the opening illustration of the Tuti-nama, again, all of this upstairs. Khujasta, the merchant's wife, he's going off on a business trip, and she has hanky-panky on her mind. She's fallen in love with a prince. And every night, for 52 nights, she's going to go out to meet him and, violate her wedding vows. But the merchant has left her in charge of a mina and a parrot. Here's the parrot. Mina, parrot. So she's, painting up her lips and rolling and curling her tinted hair. Kujasta, are you going out somewhere? And the mina says, hey, wait a minute. You're a respectable married woman. You can't do that. So she grabs the mina, dashes it to the ground, which you see here, kills it. The parrot thinks, I'd better figure out something else. So the parrot starts to tell her a story. And for 52 nights, every night as she's getting ready to go out and meet with the prince, the parrot tells her a story. And for 52 nights, she falls for it, and she never leaves the house. When she comes back, unfortunately, that's not enough. She committed adultery in her heart, and so her husband kills her, which is not a very politically correct version anymore, but that's what happens. And you can see a kind of Hamza-ish boldness in some of, this is one of the illustrations of her, I can tell you exactly which night it is for a moment, the 43rd night, with the parrot saying, wait a minute, let me tell you a little story before you go out and meet your boyfriend. And again, she falls for it. And this is that kind of boldness, these tile patterns are something drawn directly from the Hamza. But when we look at this first picture, for example, you see elements that remind you of this CPS group style. This is also in Cleveland. The breaking up of the composition into strips, we call them registers, the use of bright red backgrounds, and the somewhat square-headed female figure type with her garments very similar to the garments of the women you see here in the story of the marriage of one of Krishna's sons. So there is a kind of direct relationship. And we know that artists who worked in that CPS group style entered the Mughal workshop. There was another style, very similar in figure type, but very different in terms of palette, that illustrates another story about adultery, interestingly enough. They keep coming up. The Chandayana, in which a hero, Chanda, falls in love, a hero, Lorik, falls in love with Chanda, leaves his wife, and Chanda leaves her husband, who is one-eyed and impotent, not exactly a great figure, for this handsome, dashing hero. And here you see him being convinced to return to his wife, and she's trying to keep him from going. But again, and here's an example from the Tuti-nama. The story here is that the gods have said that they're not being worshipped properly, and if they don't get proper worship, they're going to leave the temple. So that is being reported to the king here. But you see again that Indic use of registers and a very similar kind of palette, very similar color, and similar figure types, a rather heavy-jawed figure type. So now we know that artists trained in this Chandayana group style, and we only have a handful of manuscripts in this style, also worked in the Mughal court. And we see Persian elements, a similar kind of composition. Here they're in a cave and surrounded by rocks, and this is the story of three men who are in a cave that gets blocked, and they can't get out, and a voice tells them to enumerate their transgressions. And as they do, every time one makes a confession, the rock that's blocking them moves a little. and finally they're able to leave. But you see a similar kind of composition with the rocks framing the cave shown in a cutaway manner, but these rocks are different. This is by an artist. Who was in fact the son of Abul Hassan, who came with Humayun from Iran. He's named after a great Persian artist named Behzad. In a way, this is by an artist who has the most Persian of backgrounds. I think I'm going to have to speed up here a little bit. I only have a few more slides to show, because I do want time for questions if you have any questions. Now, we see many, many links to later Mughal painting in the Tuti-nama. We also see, and to contemporary Mughal painting in the Tuti-nama. We also see many links to later painting in India in general, from Mughal painting on. That's the subject of a different lecture. I'm already worried about going over here, so I won't. But you see, for example, here from the Hamza and from the Tuti-nama, these are thieves stealing from someone who's sleeping under a great tree. You have this wonderful tree, very important in Indian art, trees. And here you see the killing of the villain from the Hamza-nama. Roughly speaking, contemporary. The Hamza is probably, in my opinion, 1562 to 1577. The Tuti-nama around 1565. So these are roughly contemporary, and you see kind of similar compositions reflected. There's a later Tuti-nama, produced around 1580. Most of it is in a library in Dublin, the Arthur Chester Beatty Library. Beatty, by the way, was an American, but he left his collection to the government of Ireland, unfortunately. Otherwise, it might be here, but it isn't. Again, it's a larger manuscript. It's not as interesting a manuscript as the Cleveland one, because by the time the Beatty Tuti-nama, and this page is upstairs, you'll see it. By the time the Beatty Tuti-nama is done, Mughal painting had sort of settled down. It was entering a mature phase in the 1580s, and it had lost that bold experimentation that we see in the Tuti-nama and the Hamza-nama, but it shows the continuing importance of the text, and it's an example of multiple versions, multiple illustrated versions of the same texts being produced in the Mughal court, and that raises questions about what these were used for, which again, the subject of another lecture. And a very important continuation of themes, women bathing. This is from that wonderful Bhagavata Purana. Krishna sporting in the Jamuna with cowherd women. Sometimes you see them described as cowgirls, which isn't exactly right in English, but they're women who are part of a group that tends cows. Here you see a Tuti-nama picture of a woman bathing, except this isn't a woman. This is a Brahmin who has a magic pearl, and when he puts it under his tongue, he appears to be a woman to others, so there's nothing new under the sun. We have a trans Brahmin. And the complication is that the Brahmin, who appears to be a woman, but is in fact a man, is the lover of the princess, but when her brother sees the Brahmin bathing, he becomes interested. And so a little bit of a crisis here. It gets resolved. But, and then here from the 17th century, an example of women bathing. This is again upstairs, a man watching. That theme is a theme that plays out almost a kind of voyeuristic theme of men watching women bathe. We see that as a common theme, not just in Mughal painting, but in Rajput painting as well. So the Tuti-nama functions as a kind of hinge between pre-Mughal and early 16th century styles, what's going on in Iran, what's going on in the Mughal court, and what happens later. I think it's a key manuscript in that sense. It helps us understand origins, and it gives us a sense of what's coming. last two slides. You've seen them before. Binney collection. Ed Binney, by the way, was the heir to the Crayola crayon fortune. He was a sort of mentor of mine, and a great collector of Indian painting. Some here in the audience knew Ed. He was an original. I have many Ed Binney stories, most of which I can't tell in public. But I hope, looking at these again, you don't see them so much as different from each other, but you see them as part of a continuum, with the bold and abstract on one side and the more highly refined, cooler, calmer style on the other side. These are intimately associated with each other. And in a certain sense, just this comparison demonstrates the transformation, the revolutionary transformation of Indian painting in the 16th century. As Pramod Chandra said, who was our mutual guru, the change was not evolutionary, it was revolutionary. And I hope I've given you some insight into that process this afternoon. Thank you for your attention, and I apologize for going over a bit. I believe if there are any questions, sorry, I
Yes.
didn't mean to do that.
Oh, no, not at all.
Might as well leave it.
Thank you, Dan.
Leave
I
it.
love that expression. Actually, I've never actually used that before, and I'm going to now, all the time.
Which?
That the Tuti-nama is a hinge between something that was being done that itself was extraordinarily new, as represented by the Bhagavata Purana, that CPS group style, and Mughal painting, imperial Mughal painting that came thereafter. And without the Tuti-nama, it would be one of these mysteries, like how could possibly something so fully
Absolutely.
formed and inspirational, how could it happen? And we're so
Mughal
lucky.
paintings seem to have been formed.
Fully formed at birth.
Fully formed at
Right?
birth.
Kind of like Maurya painting or our Cambodian Krishna upstairs,
Yeah.
where the processes of how that took place are not evident to us because we don't have a veritable Tuti-nama. And this is just one manuscript that Sherman Lee was able to recognize should remain together and in one place. And we're so proud to have it here. And thank you for drawing special attention to it. So let's open up questions to the audience. We have one in the front already, and two wonderful colleagues carrying around microphones. So if you do have a question, I'll call on you, but wait a second for the microphone to come. So yes, please.
Thank you for the very interesting lecture. I have a question about the more ideological aspect. As you mentioned, some of the Persian court painter got into trouble with the Islamic, more Islamic part of the orthodoxy. Are the Mughal Empire as strongly Islamic, and how do they treat those themes that's from the Indian heritage? For example, about the story about Vishnu, and how do they, they are officially
Well, you see here from 1590 an illustration of the life of Vishnu from a Mughal manuscript of a Persian translation of the genealogy of Hari, as it's called, the Harivansha. In the 1580s, Akbar's son, I think it was Prince Danyal, wasn't it, said that he was tired of the outworn stories of Layla and Majnun, of Shirin and Khusro, which of course are great Persian poetical stories, and he wanted something real. He wanted the stories of India. And this was part of, his father was very interested in there being an Indian identity, an identity for the Mughal court that incorporated India. He used to say, my father's favorite fruit was the melon of Central Asia. Mine is the mango of Hindustan. So in a way that's reflected in the 1580s. Akbar orders intellectuals in his court to translate the Sanskrit epics of India into Persian and to have them illustrated. And amusingly enough, he puts in charge of the operation one of the most bigoted Muslims in his court, a man named Badauni. But Badauni does what he's told. And these manuscripts are illustrated. They're now, the first versions are now in Jaipur, and good luck trying to see them. I've tried for 50 years. I came this far from seeing them, but I've never seen them. I've only seen photographs, and not many of those. So there was a strong strain of interest in Indian things, and as you see, there's the incorporation of Indian styles into Mughal painting. But there was always a strong interest in illustrating Hindu stories, and that persists. It has its ups and downs. Aurangzeb wasn't particularly interested, but when Aurangzeb came to the throne in 1658, deposing his father, wasn't a very nice story, but what are you going to do? Everybody thought that Shah Jahan was going to die. There was a civil war. Aurangzeb killed his brothers. Then Shah Jahan recovered. Well, you know, he didn't have much choice. What are you going to do? You've killed the other heirs. You've killed your father's favorite. He's not happy, so he imprisoned his father. He did fairly nicely, but still, he imprisoned his father and became emperor in 1658. And when he became emperor, one of his first acts on the day of his accession, mind you, this man who is presumed to be so bigoted, I think he gets bad press, but never mind. Both the Persian translation of the Mahabharata and the Persian translation of the Ramayana are brought to him, and he writes in the flyleaves, "These are among my most valued possessions." So even in the reign of an emperor who is widely considered to be anti-Hindu, there was an episode in his reign where the Rajput rulers rebelled, and he had to suppress the Rajput rebellion, and he got a little difficult about that. But even the emperor who is thought of as the most bigoted Muslim valued these translations of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So a scholar at Tufts, a woman named Audrey Trushke, has done a kind of reevaluation of Aurangzeb, for which she's gotten a lot of flack in India, but I think it's long overdue. I've always had kind of in spite of the bad press, I've always had kind of a soft spot for him. He wrote a series of letters to his heir that are really quite moving. He was a complicated man. He ruled for a long time. He was a complicated man. And he had a very simple burial. He financed his burial by making copies of the Holy Quran and selling them so that there would be money for his burial. He eschewed the grand tombs of his predecessors. And was buried in a simple grave open to the sky.
I think we have another question already.
In a little bit of revisionist history, do you think that perhaps the influence of having all of these Hindu texts translated and then illustrated could have come from his wife, who was a member of the Rajput Amber family?
I think that's a factor, certainly. The Mughals married princesses of Hindu courts. They nominally converted to Islam, but were often permitted to continue to practice Hinduism, even though they were nominally become Muslim. Also, remember in the workshop, the vast majority of artists working for Akbar were Hindus. And he had a great interest in Hinduism. He had a great interest in religion in general. He convened a council, a sort of conference of religious leaders, including Christian religious leaders, to discuss important questions of, like the beginning of Ben Casey, man, woman, birth, death, infinity. Those things. So that I think that, first of all, we have a man of tremendous intellectual vitality, even though he didn't read and write, tremendous curiosity, and I think he had a tremendous respect for all practices, for the practices of Indians. He was not particularly pious in a conventional sense, but I think one would say he was deeply spiritual, and he respected that in others. He visited Hindu holy men. So did his son Jahangir, and they were terribly impressed with what they saw and what they heard. So, but I think definitely this interaction. The Rajput rulers didn't particularly like often having their daughters married to Mughal princes, and if you were very privileged, you didn't have to marry your daughter to a Mughal prince. There are some rulers who, as part of the agreement when they became part of the empire, they didn't have to send their daughters to court to marry. But it happened often, and it certainly happened with the princesses of Amber. So a variety of factors, but that's definitely one of them. Right there at home, he would have been exposed to people who grew up on these stories.
Any other questions? Yes?
Thank you.
Deepak Sharma, fantastic.
I recognize you, Deepak.
Beautiful, wonderful. So it was interesting when you were speaking about this kind of translation and curiosity about Hinduism, I was thinking about an interesting kind of Orientalism at this time, and I was wondering if you could comment on that. And I was thinking how, Said has written about this kind of creation of this mystical Orient, and then you have this kind of creation of this kind of aspirational, peculiar obsession with Hinduism. Could you comment on that?
I'm half deaf. I have a little trouble hearing. Could you tell me a little bit what Deepak said?
Do you want to say it again? Do you want to try?
So thinking a little bit about an Orientalist approach to the study of Mughal painting. Yeah. Anything further?
Well, certainly the early study of Mughal painting was steeped in Orientalism, and it tried to set up a Hindu-Muslim dichotomy, which even Kumaraswamy to some degree did that in Rajput painting, a book I greatly admire, even though one has to disagree with large parts of it now. It came out in 1916, so it's been a while, and fortunately we've moved on. But I think that subsequent scholars have tried to take a sort of more holistic approach and to see it maybe in a way that Akbar would have seen it, not as something that's complex and Indian and incorporates different strains, rather than seeing it in terms of, as I said, I don't want people to see these as a dichotomy, which is all too easy to do. I want you to see them as part of a continuum. And I think that the Orientalist approach emphasizes the dichotomy, and I think that a more holistic approach emphasizes the continuum.
And did you also have a question? Yes. Yes, right here in front.
Hi, I just got a question, not a question, I'm just curious to know about that during the same time there were the Rajput paintings also happening, the Mewar school and all. So, if you could draw some connections between, the Mughal miniatures which developed and, the Rajput paintings.
Right. Well, again, as I said, that's a subject for another lecture, but this style on the left doesn't die out. This style on the left changes, it absorbs a certain amount of Mughal influence, but this strain becomes a source for painting in Mewar, for example, in the Rajput state of Mewar, painting in central India, in what we call Malwa painting, which is another can of worms, but it's a useful term. And in fact, in the aforementioned book, Rajput Painting, Kumaraswamy addresses this, where he talks about even after he's tried to set up somewhat of a dichotomy, he talks about the interrelationships. And what we see is, we see compositional elements, for example. If I'd had more time, I could have shown an example of a Mughal painting from about 1606, about the time Jahangir comes to the throne, and a Mewar painting from 1605, where again, it's sort of this comparison, but it's later. And again, you see a distinct stylistic difference, but a remarkable compositional parallel. And some Rajput styles, or some styles made in Rajput courts, are directly based on Mughal painting. Mughal artists go to these courts, bringing their style with them, and sometimes that style remains highly Mughalized, sometimes it changes, but there is a tremendous variety of interaction. There's very conservative painting, where well into the 17th century, you'd hardly know that Mughal painting existed, and there's painting also for Rajput patrons that comes directly out of Mughal sources and is highly Mughalized. And interestingly enough, now we don't have any names for these painters. I've identified a group of painters, and you give them letters of the alphabet because you don't have any names. But in the Rajput material, in the 17th century, that Mewar material I told you about, up to the middle of the 17th century, painters working in a style clearly derived from the style on the left are principally Muslims, not Hindus at all. So people want to call that a Hindu style, and you've got a quote-unquote Hindu style being painted by Muslims. You have the great Muslim painter of the second half of the 15th century, of the 17th century in Mewar, Sahabdin, illustrating the Sanskrit texts for the ruler, sometimes quite obscure Sanskrit texts for the ruler, sometimes well-known ones like the Bhagavata Purana, the Ramayana, but the Ramayana, head of the Ramayana project is in fact a Hindu. But you have these stylistic developments that I would argue are not dependent on the religious identity of the painters. You might argue they're dependent on the religious identity of the patrons, but certainly not of the painters, because you have painters working, and in fact, we have a manuscript in this style illustrating a Chandayana. So it's kind of all over the place. These things don't fall into neat boxes. It's a complicated history.
Yeah, and the Chandayana is a Sufi manuscript.
And the
just to
Chandayana is a
clarify,
Sufi manuscript.
Islamic.
Right, Islamic manuscript, exactly. It's complicated Sufi manuscript that was written in the 14th century, was extremely popular, and then it kind of passed out of popularity. It was only rediscovered in the 20th century.
All right, we've got time for one more question.
Here's someone. I think is that John Court?
Someone's got the microphone.
It is John Court.
John, did you have a question too? All right. Two more questions then. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, so I thought that one painting with the purple grove and the people fighting in the middle was really remarkable. And you mentioned that this was a period of like a lot of change in like artistic styles, and so I was wondering if there's any particular significance behind the fact that like the plants and the horse kind of were leaving the borders that were set for the image.
The Shahnameh page.
I didn't.
Yes. Oh, he's wondering about the significance of the horse and the plants leaving the border of the painting on the Shatak Mas Shahnameh.
Well, the horse is the horse of the hero, and the horse is himself a great figure in the narrative. That's interesting. Yes, the picture edging out into the margin. That's a characteristic of Persian painting. And it's something I've also always found interesting. You sometimes see it in Mughal painting. You sometimes see this sort of enlargement out of the rectilinear picture area. You don't see it in the Tuti-nama, I don't think ever, do you?
Sometimes a sword will come down into the
Oh, a little bit.
into the
bit.
text box,
not
but
like
not
this
much.
One. Not like this one. But yeah, that's a characteristic of Persian painting, and it is. I guess it's the inventiveness of the artists. These were tremendously accomplished artists, as you can see by looking at their products.
All right, last question.
Dan, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Thank you for a wonderful talk that's both illuminating and entertaining.
Thank you, John.
In a very Dan Ehnbom style. It's a wonderful afternoon.
I am what I am. I can be no other.
Can you go back to the last set of two? Yeah, that one. I've got a more material question for you. I mean, you've done a wonderful job showing how there are these sort of continuities of style, even painters moving, from west to east, from Iran into India. My question is, as we see the differences here in both sort of style and palette between these two paintings, given the way in which in the 16th century trade opened up immensely, were there new pigments that were coming into South Asia?
That's a very interesting question, and pigment analysis is something that we need to do a whole lot more of. And I know that there have been various projects over the years. It'd be nice to get. There's one now at Harvard on pigment, and there's a. I can refer you to a book that discusses some of this. It's a book that has been out for a long time. It was by Chandra, Pramod Chandra's father, in 1949, published in Lucknow, called The Techniques of Mughal Painting. And he addresses some issues about pigment, and Kumaraswamy does also in Rajput painting, 1916. There were some changes in pigment, yes. There were some pigments, for example, the white here is a chalk white that tends to flake. The Mughal white is a much more stable pigment. So the Mughals, there was some pigment continuity, Indian yellow, for example, Peori, but there were also changes in pigment. We need to do a whole lot more study on that to figure out the full range of that story.
So interestingly, I'll jump in because we did do pigment analysis on a number of the Tuti-nama pages and found an extraordinary diversity and range of pigments, which suggests this idea of experimentation and artists from multiple places, that it looks like artists brought their own materials with them. And so certain artists working in certain regions traditionally used a set of kinds of materials, and then they would bring those with them if they were to move elsewhere. And so the fact that in one tiny little Tuti-nama page we have 3 whites, 2 blues, 2 yellows, and 2 different greens in one tiny composition suggests that these are multiple artists coming from different regions merging together in a kind of collaboration.
Young, bold, fond of experiment.
And on that note, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.